Hello and welcome to Counterpoint. I'm your guest host, Michelle Simard, and today I thought we'd talk about Alberta's leadership race, on who will replace Jason Kenney and become Alberta's new premier. Any change in provincial leadership always has an effect on federal and interprovincial relationships. Whomever replaces Jason Kenney can set the tone for the next issues Canadians may need to discuss. This in turn affects us all, and that is why I thought it would be beneficial for our viewers to hear what impact the leadership race will have on all of us. To discuss the leadership race, we have Kris Sims, the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And we have Josh Andrus, Executive Director at Project Confederation, a group that aims to build grassroots support for measures that would increase Alberta's power on the federal stage. Welcome to you both, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As you both know, there are many contenders in the leadership race, with many of them displaying a wide variety of backgrounds and cultures, which I think is healthy for any leadership race. It gives people choice and also an opportunity to hear varying viewpoints. Diversity in thought is advantageous for any political discourse. So, Kris, what are your thoughts on the candidates and what they represent?
Well, we're really encouraged to see so many candidates with good experience and fresh ideas, and in some cases, according to the rest of Canada, rather radical ideas when it comes to Alberta. So, for example, we want to see absolutely no PST brought into the province of Alberta. We want to see no tax hikes. We want to see them fight Ottawa tooth and nail on things like C-69, the so-called No More Pipelines bill. We want to see a new deal when it comes to equalization, because we know the Albertans are getting screwed for the past several years on that. So all of these candidates, to a large extent, are talking about these issues during this campaign, and it's very good to see that.
And Josh?
All right, I'm just going to cut right to the chase here. I think one thing that's become very obvious is that, at least within the United Conservative Party, Alberta's place within Confederation is considered a weak point. Back in October, we had a referendum to try and remove the concept of equalization from the Constitution of Canada. That'd be Section 36. That referendum passed with 62% of Albertans voting in favor of that. The purpose was to create a discussion with the rest of the country about our place, about how we're sending all of this money through various transfer programs to Eastern Canada, and yet when it comes to developing our energy sector, or even recently with the fertilizer ban or whatever they're trying to do, you end up with the situation where our major industries are under attack, and yet we're still sending $20+ billion a year to the rest of the country. I think that Jason Kenney, unfortunately, as much as he talked a big game and sent a lot of angry letters to the Prime Minister, there's an attitude or there's a feeling around the province that was ineffective, that we're still getting hit on a regular basis. We're still considered to be like we're a piggy bank to a country that doesn't really care about us. And I think that's the feeling. I think that's why the discussion has moved to things that other parts of the country might consider radical. I think that's a big reason why we're here, is because we haven't gotten anywhere in the last 2 years, despite the fact that we had a fair deal panel. We took some steps, but there were 63 recommendations and only 2 have been taken place. I think that's definitely defined this race.
And Kris, how do you think the race is going so far?
It's been very vigorous. I've attended 3 separate debates here in Alberta in person. It's usually standing room or sitting room only. Lots of people involved.
How many debates have there been?
I think there's only been 3 or 4. Some of them are different, where only certain people show up. And there's actually a new debate coming up very soon in the capital in Edmonton, where all candidates will be there, and that's an official party debate. Sometimes there's an official party debate, and other times it's kind of, a separate entity that is inviting people to discuss things. And I must say, there is a lot of energy. There's people usually standing room only. They're yelling questions. There's good media scrums afterwards. They're all taking this very seriously. And again, when we can talk about stuff like New Deal equalization, getting our pipelines through, lowering our taxes, those are all really positive things for taxpayers who want smaller, more accountable government. So we're encouraged so far. We want to see results once one of these people become premier, though.
And when will that date be?
That we'll have to decide. As soon as the party leadership is finished deciding, they of course automatically become premier. But of course, the key question after that is, when do they go to a general election and get a mandate?
Yes, well, that's always the key question. How long will the mandate be for the next leader? So with that being said, we're going to take a break and we'll have that discussion. Welcome back. And as we discussed in the previous break, we were talking about some of the issues that were brought up in regards to this leadership race. And so one of the issues that I thought was really important, and you mentioned it also, Josh, is the fact how Alberta feels, and many Albertans feel that they're not being well received within the rest of Canada, despite Jason Kenney's letters. And one of the candidates, Daniel Smith, talked about having Albertan Sovereignty Act. Kris, what do you think about that?
Well, it's a great question. We want to see results based on issues. So, for example, we want to see pipelines going out to our coasts so we can get our stuff to market. We want to see them fighting the federal carbon taxes, for example. We want to see a new deal for equalization. So, we want to see the results on those issues, but we also understand that there's a lot of political and social ramifications to the sovereignty language. So that's a difficult one for us to balance, but suffice to say, we want to see more rights for Albertans, more ability to get our energy out to the coast because it's good for the country and it saves us money, and we want to see them fighting the carbon taxes. And so we want to see that discussion being had. What I do appreciate coming from that sort of language is that firm letters haven't worked. We've been writing firm letters to Ottawa now for decades. So if they need to turn up the heat, then that's just fine with us.
So perhaps using strong language like that may cause others within Canada, especially the federal government, to say, hey, we don't really want another Quebec situation. So maybe we should start paying attention. So perhaps even though she's putting the idea out there, it may not be practical to do so, but once you put it on the table and it becomes something that the media talks about, then it gives a little push sometimes to get heard better.
Yeah, it does. And a linguist will tell you, and I know Josh probably can talk about this as well, there's a difference between sovereignty and separation. So asking for a new deal and new treatment on behalf of Albertans within the context of Canada, in our experience politically, is different from saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm slamming the door. I'm packing up my coat and we're gone. That's a difference. And so there's what's encouraging is that people are discussing this now. Yeah. And they're talking about things like railway corridors and energy corridors and deals going, kind of around the federal government in order to get the energy out there, in order to give Alberta more rights. And so that's what's important here.
I agree. Go on, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, just in terms of the constitutionality of it, I don't think anybody really knows whether it is constitutional or not because we haven't seen the way it's written. I think really the impetus for why the Sovereignty Act's become a central point of this campaign is a lot of it is around the Supreme Court ruling on the Alberta Court of Appeals ruling on the Bill C-48, which is the Impact Assessment Act, otherwise known as the No More Pipelines Act. The act effectively gives the federal government free rein on any major infrastructure project, whether that be highways, pipelines, oil sands operations, agriculture, feedlots, so on and so forth, of over a certain size. And that is essentially, it's not just a No More Pipelines Act, it's a No More Infrastructure Act. And that also has been struck down by the Alberta Court of Appeals. So in this, and I believe it was 8 other provinces as well, their court struck it down. The federal government is still moving ahead with its Impact Assessment Act. It's still moving ahead with the regulations. This is something that the Sovereignty Act would likely apply to simply because it already does have court. It has essentially the law has been struck down by the Court of Alberta Appeals, and it hasn't yet gone to the Supreme Court. So in the meantime, it would be an opportunity for us to get some projects moving. And that's just one example. I believe as long as it's framed in the sense that we have court backing for a lot of these decisions, I think it changes the conversation dramatically. And I think a lot of this is just overreaction.
It could be, but as I mentioned earlier, what happens in Alberta affects the rest of Canada, and most importantly, it can set the new course of what our discussions are. And so, for me, what I think the major issue is for people who stem from Ontario, and of course, major of your conversation is talking about the pipelines going east. Now, for many people, it's in a tagline: pipelines are bad, they're not good. But as I always tell people, I'm like, but what's the alternative? Getting dirty gas from a different country? So long as it's not in our backyard. And so I think there's that contention that's kind of happening with Albertans and with the rest of Canada, because many people look at Alberta as saying you just want it because you want to make yourself rich and you don't want to give us the rest of the benefits. And so what I do think is at hand, and I haven't heard it yet from many of the leadership candidates, is how to bridge. How to bridge, yes, I hear Alberta sovereignty, but how do we bridge it? And I want to talk about that in our next segment, so we'll be right back when we take our break. Welcome back. Prior to the break, I was talking about how there could be a bridge between what Alberta wants and needs and also the rest of Canada. So this way, there can be some harmony between the provinces because, like you said, sovereignty doesn't mean you pack up and leave. It just means you're having a little bit more autonomy. Kris, can you talk a little bit more about how the new leader should be talking about, or should they even be talking about bridging and having harmonious relations?
I think that it's important, just from a communications perspective and a Canadian perspective, for any Premier of Alberta to speak to Canadians. Now, talking to Ottawa might feel like a waste of time sometimes, but talking to average people in, Bracebridge, Ontario, or Gimli, Manitoba, in Montreal, depends on where you are, that's important. And so, for example, from the taxpayer's perspective, this is one stat that just blows my mind. Because we don't have our proper pipeline capacity in Canada, we have lost out on around $13 billion just in federal taxes. So what that means is if people had been properly employed, expanding and building new pipelines as at capacity, what we've been wanting, okay, that those income taxes those folks would be paying would be $13 billion over the past several years. That's $13 billion that is not going to pay down the debt. That's $13 billion that's not going to healthcare, education, roads, all the stuff that people want. So that's just the raw number. That doesn't include municipal property taxes or any of the other tax revenue that coming from those pipelines. And so I think what's important is to try to reach out and bridge that gap between an Ontarian and an Albertan. So for example, if an Ontarian uses natural gas, okay, to heat their home, they need to understand where that comes from. They need to understand how expensive or affordable it is, depending on where it's coming from and who's providing it to them. Typically, it's coming from Alberta or northeastern British Columbia, which is, quite often the same sort of place, politically speaking. And so that's what needs to happen. They need to make that connection between their energy needs, their tax bills, and what is coming out of Alberta.
We just need a little bit more of an information campaign for people all across Canada. So when they hear pipelines and they hear how Albertans want them, they're not saying, oh, it's because Albertans don't care about the environment. They just have to explain in a little bit different terms. And perhaps, like you said, where does your energy come from? And where does the gas, exactly, where does the fuel come from your car? And what's happening there? All right. And Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on that, I think information is absolutely key. I mean, the energy industry is the industry that powers every single other industry. If you think about any consumer good that you use at any point in your day, it at every point in the production cycle had an energy as an input. And so when it comes to inflation, and we're seeing that as a major issue across the country, we have an issue where inflation isn't, in this case, just a monetary or fiscal phenomenon. It's also an energy phenomenon where the cost of energy has been increasing, which is driving up the cost of goods, which is hurting the rest of the country in a certain sense. And a lot of it has to do with the simple fact that we can't export our product outside of our province. We can't export it to the coast. We can't export it to the East Coast. We can't export it to Europe. We can't get our energy products out of our own province because the federal government has policies that are directly impacting our ability to build anything or do anything. And I think that is a major problem. I think the fertilizer issue is another problem as well. I mean, what is that going to do to crop yields? And with lower crop yields, what's that going to do to the price of bread? What's that going to do to the price of corn? What's that going to do to all these prices? So our major industries in this province are very much a part of the rest of this country. We have been a big part in building the rest of this country, and we'd like to continue to have that ability. And that's really what the discussion around sovereignty within the country has been about this entire time.
So from both of your perspectives, how do you see the leadership candidates? Are they talking about these issues that you say are extremely important for Albertans and also apparently for the rest of Canadians?
The main front runners are most of the people who are running, I think all of them actually who are running have been an MLA sometime in their past or are currently an MLA. Many of them are cabinet ministers. So this is not their first rodeo. They know how to do this stuff. The key here, though, is actually seeing results. Right? So it's good that they're talking about all of this stuff, but we are going to hold them to account when they become premier to make sure they're doing this stuff. That it's, no more strongly worded letters. They're going to have to be creative. They're going to have to get really pushy with Ottawa because, as Josh points out, they're hitting us from all sides. And I'll just raise a tax issue, for example, with farmers. A lot of people don't know this, but farmers are charged carbon tax on the natural gas and propane they use to dry their grain and product. I have personally seen bills from producers that are more than $10,000. And it's because of this carbon tax that has hit on that. A lot of folks don't know that. What eats grain? Everything.
I agree. And I do want to pick that up, but we just have to take a break. Welcome back. So right before the break, we had a very, very energetic Kris talking about the carbon tax. So please continue. And I would like to hear the rest of your point because I think it's important for our viewers to know.
I think it's important for all Canadians to know that the carbon tax is costing them money and it's a compounded layering effect. So because the carbon tax is applied to both gasoline and diesel, to both natural gas, propane, home heating oil, all you need to do is think about from the farm all the way to your table. That stuff is costing more because of the carbon tax, because the farmer is paying the carbon tax on drying the product, and the truckers are paying the carbon taxes on diesel, and then the grocery store is paying the carbon tax on the natural gas to heat and cool their facility. So if you're seeing inflation, if you're seeing things costing more, carbon taxes play a huge factor, and the second carbon tax is coming into effect next year federally.
Okay, I hear you, but the counterpoint to it is, the whole point of having a carbon tax is to reduce emissions, to try to achieve the climate change policy. So what's the counterpoint is, well, what's the alternative? Like, if you don't want carbon tax, what are we going to do to incentivize to use greater technologies to make not as much pollution and emissions?
Great question. So very quickly, British Columbia has had the highest carbon taxes in all of North America since 2008. Their emissions keep on going up. All the time. Their emissions are going up. The answer is the carbon taxes aren't the answer. Technology is the answer.
I agree.
So you can do carbon capture, you can do all sorts of stuff. Taxing people into poverty is not helping the environment. We have evidence, perfect evidence in British Columbia.
So I agree with you. I think technology is the solution. And we heard just recently with Justin Trudeau and the Chancellor from Germany, Olaf Scholz, that they want to create the hydrogen and maybe create plants, and they're going to see if there's a business case for it, which I also find a little interesting, where I was just like, okay, yes, that's great. We already have energy that's available. Now you want to create another energy source that could be cleaner and good. And I'm okay with that. And you want to see if there's a business case.
Sure,
but it has to be
corporate welfare.
Yes, exactly.
Taxpayers are not going to be corporate welfare bankrolling this.
Exactly.
So, for example, if you really want to tackle emissions, export cleaner natural gas to places like India. Tackle the big end of the arithmetic problem. That's where they're still burning wood and animal dung and coal. So if you want to reduce global emissions, export more of our natural gas.
So bringing it back to the leadership race, I know you guys have to be impartial, but in a short statement, Josh, can you tell me about each of the candidates and what they stand for, so our viewers have a little bit of an understanding of who's running?
Yeah, for sure. There's really three main horses in the race. I'll quickly touch over who they are. Right now, it appears that Danielle Smith and her Sovereignty Act, that they appear to be the front runner, at least at this point in time. Coming in second appears to be Travis Taves. He's fighting for, or he wants to do a police force, a provincial pension plan, and he is also stumping on his balanced budget, which was a big deal, especially right before the leadership. Then you've got Brian Jean, who also wants to do a lot of what Travis is doing, but he wants to reopen the Constitution. Then we've got Leela Ahir, Rebecca Schultz, Rajan Sani, and Todd Lowen, and they're smaller campaigns, but they're still in the race, so they've managed to raise the money. Rajan and Rebecca seem to be lining up with similar campaigns to Travis Taves, whereas Todd Lowen is very similar to Danielle Smith. So there's a lot of similarities across the board. There's differences as well, but that's just a quick
Yeah,
summary as fast
no,
as I
thank you.
could,
And that's what we needed. So we're just about to wrap up. In 10 seconds or less, Kris, what should the viewers take away from today's show?
That Alberta matters to the rest of Canada. What happens here has an effect on everybody coast to coast. So please do watch carefully.
And Josh, you're going to have the last word.
Well, cost increases are a big issue out east, and we have a way to help alleviate some of that here. We just need the federal government to get off our back, and I think that's been the key takeaway of this leadership, and I think that's a key message that I'd love your viewers to take away from this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, both of you. This was very informative and helpful, and I guess maybe we'll come back again and see what the results are.
You bet.
Sounds good.
Whomever wins the leadership race will become premier. What they may achieve during their tenure may be difficult, as they will not have a full term. What is key is what the new leader will do with the time they have left in office, and will it be effective for the UCP to win another election? That remains to be unknown. What is known is that Alberta is a strong province that can affect the Canadian political discourse. Canadians alike need to start being mindful of all issues within our democratic country, because the geopolitical politics is shaky right now, and Canada needs to protect its borders, its people, and its values. I hope the show provided a much-needed perspective. Have a great day and talk soon.